I just hit record and I'm already hungry. Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alana, and as you can probably tell, I'm a book nerd and I review books on this channel. And today's video is going to be a two-in-one. So that was four, but a two-in-one. I'm going to be reviewing Elodie Harper's released books that are in her Wolf Den trilogy, and these are the ones that are currently published. So we have The Wolf Den, which is the first installment, and then we have The House with the Golden Door. Before I proceed to the review and why I'm doing two-in-one, is typically when I sit down to record, I remove the stack of books that I typically have in the background of my desk because it just looks cluttered. But scratch that. That takes too much time when I need to set up. It's going to stay there because in a way, it's actually a bit of a sneak peek into my upcoming reading list. This is my September list. So these are the books that I'll be tackling in September. You can't see them, but it's Hilary Mantel's Bring Up the Bodies, Sweet Bitter by Stephanie Danlers, Fritchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier, her name, The Roman Way by Edith Hamilton, and Troy by Stephen Fry. And then here I'm starting to play around with my October reads. So I'm going to keep those there. It's a sneak preview. Somebody left me a comment or messaged me actually months ago. They're like, oh, we'd like to see more of your books in the background. But my books are spread out everywhere in the house. And so maybe I'll just leave books here so you can kind of see what I'm rotating throughout. And you can see more books in my collection. So there's that. I also have my hair in a ponytail because it's hot. It's hot. It's humid. And I ain't got time for that. Okay, I gotta let my ears breathe. So the reason why I'm doing two reviews in one is because it was requested. And why is this book is upside down? And if you watched my my haul from a few videos ago, I don't care for hardbacks. So I just find them to be clunky to hold them. I have small hands, okay, so they're just a bit much. But when it comes to Elodie Harper's novels, I just get them as soon as possible in the hardbacks, and I get them shipped from the UK because I'm impatient. But so somebody asked me to review The Wolf Den because I said I would be reviewing The House with the Golden Door. So to kill two birds with one stone, I'm going to, in this video, do The Wolf Den and then go into The House with the Golden Door so that since it's in a trilogy, if you are curious to pick either of these books up, you kind of get a gist of what's happening in the story. Don't worry, this will be as spoiler-free as possible. Most of my reviews tend to be spoiler-free. I just focus on themes. We are 3 minutes in. Let's go in. So we're going to go with The Wolf Den. So this is Elodie Harper's debut novel from the Wolf Den trilogy. And so it's taking place in 74 AD in ancient Rome. When you see a bird flying, that moment when it chooses to swoop over lower or soar higher, when there is nothing but air stopping it, that's what freedom feels like. So The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper is, again, historical fiction set in 1744 AD. That would be like American Revolution type stuff. No. It's set in Pompeii in 74 AD. And we have a main character, Amara, who's been sold into slavery by her mother because her family has fallen on, destitution in a sense. They're poor. And so she ends up becoming, when her mother doesn't know this, she thinks that she's going to be serving as a maid in somebody's household, but ultimately she ends up being sold into prostitution at a establishment, for lack of a better word, called the Wolf Den. And at the Wolf Den, there are 4 other women. However, despite the unbearable conditions that these women have to go through, Amara is really the most ambitious out of the 5 of them, and she never gives up on her desire for freedom, and she uses her wit and resourcefulness as an attempt to achieve her goal. And so Elodie Harper in no way, shape, or form makes this a romantic book. And by that I mean that historical fiction often has this tendency, this flaw, if you will, to romanticize the past. And I'm a person who was I was a history major, and I love historical fiction. It's really my favorite genre. It's tempting to do so. Not saying that we don't give credit where credit is due, but sometimes I'm not an author. Authors may tend to over romanticize the past, and maybe part of that is due to being disillusioned about our present times and thinking maybe we were better off with certain things in place, whatever. Elodie Harper is diving right into really difficult events and topics, and where there is typically a sense of otherworldliness in historical fiction, The Wolf Den is realistic and violent and crude and graphic. And by crude and graphic, I mean she's just being honest about the harsh reality. And I'm going to talk about that more in The House with the Golden Door when I talk about code switching and the way that Elodie Harper chooses not to use language, specifically profanity. So when I say crude, I mean she's using profanity because that's something that would be more associated with the circles that Amara is running in as a prostitute. So we'll get into that. What stuck out to me the most about The Wolf Den is how resilient these 5 women were or are, and in the friendships that form between them that just keep them hanging on sometimes by like the skin of their own teeth. It keeps them from these friendships and these bonds with each other, just can keep them from completely falling apart, right? And so so we have one character named Dido, who is Amara's closest friend at the Wolf Den. I hate it, Dido says. I hate men staring. I hate it when she trails off. I guess I'll get used to it, all of it, eventually. And then Amara says, no, just endure it. Never get used to it. So again, like I said, when one of these women's walls start to crack, the other will step in and apply the caulk. That's kind of how I had described that in my review. There are times when their relationships are strained. However, Harper avoids the typical cattiness that would have been so easy to write here. And I found that refreshing, especially in the first book. Now, in the second book, some more games are played, and I'm not going to say anything further because that would be a spoiler, but people do what they have to do in a way to survive. But I do find it, especially in this book, how these characters have a conscience and they really try to stick up for each other. And it's just so easy to create that cattiness, that stereotypical cattiness that's often portrayed amongst women. And she doesn't do that here. And regardless of the conflicts that some of these women come across or come against, even when maybe some of those conflicts come up with each other, they refuse to let it disintegrate their friendships. And they still remain loyal to each other. A phrase that actually kept coming back to my mind while reading The Wolf Den was the term Stockholm Syndrome. So with any establishment in which prostitutes are being housed, there must be someone who oversees this establishment, and that is Felix. And Felix is loathsome. And Amara hates Felix, as she should. He's a scumbag, okay? He's cruel and he's violent and he's licentious. That's a word that should be used more often because it rolls off the tongue. Licentious. I do not consider English to be the prettiest language of them all. I would say that would be the French. I'm sorry, French to me is just a stunning language. English, meh, not the prettiest language out there, but it has its moments. Licentious is one of those moments. And Felix is manipulative. I mean, he can make your skin crawl. However, there are times when Amara is taken aback by instances in which he comes across as being playful and humorous and even tender. And it does not help when the person is attractive and fit. And Amara struggles with this. She's like, he's so attractive, but he's such a jerk. It's this, she's having this weird conflict at times. And Felix comes from a very troubling past. himself. And so there is this odd tension at times between Amara and her abuser and provider, because he is her abuser, but he's also her provider at the same time. And whether she would like to admit it or not, there is this vague undercurrent of sympathy, empathy, and fondness for him, even if it's slightly misconstrued at times and confusing for her. But and here's a quote from Amara. She says, "I hate him," she tells the empty room. "I hate him." She trawls through her memories, remembering every cruelty, but other images push through like weeds. Like I said, don't get me wrong. She hates this guy. She loathes him. She wants him, she wishes him ill. She wants him dead, dead, okay? But she's still confused by him at times. And this is again where Elodie Harper excels. She creates these characters and their relationships and makes them more complex than she really needed to be. Felix could have easily been this flat, one-dimensional, cruel pimp, but she makes him more dynamic than he needs to be. She adds these nuances to his personality that even conflicted me as a reader. I was like, this guy is horrible, but he also has, clearly he has some post-traumatic stress in his own life from his childhood that needs to be worked out. You know, the man needs a therapist. Okay. And so again, like Amara, I loathed him, but at times I felt bad for him at the same time. And I love it when an author does that. I do, because it's easy to cop out and just make them, you know, these types of characters like Felix to be hated and just move on with your life. So let's switch gears. We are going to talk about one of my favorite themes in this novel, and this is what I picked up on. It's the tactic, and Elodie Harper is using this tactic, how comedy and fiction is used as a medium to reveal tragic realities. There's nothing more truthful than a play, is there? I love them all. But do you know, I think comedies are braver somehow. All of life up there on the stage, and actors have the courage to say what one cannot say elsewhere. And that is actually how the ancients used plays, the Greeks, ancient Greeks and ancient Romans. And Elodie Harper plays to this here because one, the ancient Greeks especially were, and by the way, Amara is Greek. These ancient playwrights used their art form to critique its own time period. The Greeks in particular believed in the ultimate. They had a stronger sense of freedom of speech than what we have in, let's say, the United States. They would look at what we consider freedom of speech and probably consider it not that free compared to how they perceived freedom of speech. And so they used plays to critique leaders and such. Not saying that there were never repercussions, but they used it to critique the society, and that was fine overall. And so here I said, this greatly reminded me of Aristophanes, the ancient Greek playwright and master of the old comedy, in which his comedic plays were also considered a greater expression of freedom of speech than we have now, which is what I just said. So in a way, one can argue that Harper is doing this with The Wolf Den. And though this is by no means a comedy, the method of using fiction to portray these harsh realities for these women, it allows her to dive into the deeper abyss of human suffering. Those people during this time period, these slaves who were often overlooked. And so it makes it more palatable for the reader to digest when it's in a format like this. And The Wolf Den is not graphic for the sake of being graphic. There are situations where Harper is, I would say, quite blunt, but there are also times when she knows how to fade to black, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in The House with the Golden Door. So she knows how to balance that line where she gives you just enough, but she doesn't give you too much. All right, she's not doing it to be voyeuristic in any way or for shock value. And even though these characters are fictional, their experiences are not. Lastly, and then I'm going to wrap this up and dive into The House with the Golden Door. I want to talk about dialogue and writing style in The Wolfden in particular. And again, I'm going to talk about it more in The House with the Golden Door. So from the very first page, I noticed that the language is very contemporary. Harper writes this in a very modern voice with the style of the writing. And at first, I was a little wary of this because, again, this is a pitfall of historical fiction. The author almost sounds too contemporary, and it doesn't feel like historical fiction, or it feels like the author is projecting 21st century ideals and aesthetics, if you will, on the past, which makes no sense. And there was actually only one piece of dialogue, one word. It was a very short sentence, a very short sentence from one character in this particular book that threw me out of the story. And I was like, that actually feels too contemporary. I felt like that was a very contemporary way to string those profanities together. That was the only time. And so overall, though, I realized why this didn't bother me with her contemporary writing style. That is because we're not dealing with aristocrats here in ancient Rome. Does Amara come across the upper classes? Yes, but her life is not glamorous in any way. She is the lowest of the low. She is a slave. Not only that, on top of that, she is a prostitute. So she is the lowest of the low on the totem pole. So these are not characters that really care about refinery in any way. They can't care. So they are using common language. They are using common profanities. They are coarse and rough around the edges. And so it makes sense. And again, Elodie Harper massages this even more in The House with the Golden Door. The way that they use language is indicative of their social status. This is not a case, thank God, in which 21st century identity politics or 21st century understandings of womanhood and how we view women today and all this other stuff, it's not being projected on this book. Also, if you've ever looked at translations of ancient Roman graffiti, none of this is shocking, right? It was pretty blunt. Overall, I enjoyed The Wolfden. Let's wrap this up and dive into the next one. But overall, I enjoyed The Wolfden. When I read it last summer, when it was released, I gave it a 4 out of 5. And it was fast-paced. It was one of those novels where I read it in the summer. So it's one of those novels where I sat down on the couch under the AC because it's hot outside, it's cold in the house, and just read it in like a week, and I just couldn't put it down. It was compulsively readable, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed how and appreciated the research that Elodie Harper put into this. I feel like ancient Rome during this time period is not really a period of time in historical fiction that I find a lot of authors willing to tackle. The only other trilogy that takes place, and it takes place 30 years, almost 30 to 25 years prior to The Wolfden, is Francine Rivers' Mark of the Lion trilogy, which takes place in ancient Rome. But right now we're in this boom of Greek myth retellings, but this is its own time period. So she's not dealing with myth at all. So anyway, yes, let's dive into The House with the Golden Door. I think I said this, I gave The Wolfden a 4 out of 5. So that means I really enjoyed it. If you know me, I am stingy with my 5-star reviews, okay? Stingy. That means, for me to give a 5-star review, that means I think that it's a nearly perfect, if it is as perfect as a piece of fiction can get. This was released this summer, and so in late June, and I hopped right on it, okay? Because I just couldn't wait. My eyes itchy. I'm already getting hangry. All right, so let's hop right into this. There is always a price to pay for underestimating a woman. First of all, that quote is chef's kiss. I told somebody the other day, I was like, never underestimate a woman's ability to find something out. Okay, we know how to dig for information. Okay, just put that out there. All right, so The House with the Golden Door is, of course, the sequel and of The Wolf Den. And in this novel, I don't necessarily consider this a spoiler, but I figure that if you are still listening to this video after The Wolf Den, you're curious about this book, so you don't care if I give maybe the most minor of details away. So we know that in The Wolf Den, Amara is striving to free herself. So she does manage to do that. I just won't say how. So in The House with the Golden Door, she is now navigating her freedom. But that freedom has a lot of strings attached to it. Amara's life does not get any easier. In fact, I would argue that her life gets more complicated because she still has to be watchful of Felix. She has to remain the facade of being totally invested in her patron. And the way that things happened, like when people were asleep, so somebody could free you. Somebody could free you and you would have a patron. And that's how you manage to get by, you know what I mean? But you are really still at the will of your patron. And her patron, he complicated. Rufus is complicated. Was that a spoiler? Well, her patron is special. To complicate matters further, my girl falls in love with the man in Rufus's household. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not saying anymore. So let's just get into some of the things that I liked about this book. And so Harper really continues to explore the concept of freedom and what it means to be truly independent. And like I said, Amara's freedom has a lot of she has a lot of strings attached. She's still constantly performing for others, mainly men. And she's still an object of their whims and desires. She is not independently wealthy because, of course, she has a patron in order to survive. And she needs a patron to support her welfare unless she's able to come up with a way to be independent and independently wealthy. And even with her background, those options are very limited. And in a way, she would have to dabble in things that she would rather not dabble in because it's just creating this cycle of slavery and prostitution. So again, in an effort to truly become independent, she comes up with these ways to make money and to set money aside. However, her striving and her ambition is a double-edged sword. And she becomes, she entrenches herself in these schemes and which add more strings to her freedom. And there's a callousness that begins to enter into Amara's character. Is it them or me, she tells herself. Sorry, it's them or me, she tells herself. Anyone would do the same. If you had been me, how welcoming might you have been if you saw yourself in the other? When I reviewed this book, and when I wrote up my review for this book, I contrasted the way that Elodie Harper approaches her characters versus Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is well known for having these pure characters that remain naively innocent throughout the entire story, regardless of what they go through and regardless what happens to them. Harper does not do that. And that's actually one thing that people who critique Dickens do not like about Dickens. It doesn't bother me too much with Dickens, and I kind of talked about that in my Bleak House review, because Dickens has so many characters, like it kind of balances itself out. It's kind of his charm in my way, I think, and it makes it feel a little bit more play-like, I think. But Harper doesn't do that. Like I said, these characters definitely carry the battle scars of their circumstances, both mentally, emotionally, physically, all of the above. And so I do find her characters to be very realistic because they're not always likable all the time. They're complex. Amara is not always likable. And Amara in this book, she does some things and I'm like, my girl, I really want to slap you right now. I really do. Even I like you, but I want to slap you. And so Harper is really getting at, when you go through some really traumatic things, how much of that innocence can you really retain when you become more and more wise to the corrupt ways of the world? Only fools think life is like a play, with any hope of holding on to your virtue. I really want to know how Charles Dickens would respond to that, because don't get me wrong, like I said, I love me some Charles Dickens, but he takes a different approach. And I also, Dickens would actually get up and have some of his stuff performed on the stage. Also, think about it, Dickens was writing in that's just Dickens. So there are other authors at the time doing different things in different countries, but that's just me. I just wanted to pick on my boy Chuck for the day. Now, again, I'm not going very into much detail with this book because it's a trilogy. I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm going to talk about why I think that the House with the Golden Door is a stronger novel than The Wolf Den, as it should be. I think that as a writer continues to write and hone their craft, again, The Wolf Den was her debut novel, their work, you should see a continued refinement in their works as they mature as a writer and they get used to this process. And they learn some things along the way, and editors continue to help them, because behind every good writer is a good editor. The novel is plot heavy, but it's also heavy with character development. The pacing is really good. There's always something happening, yet the plot doesn't feel rushed. This is not a thin book, but it's still fast paced, and you can get through these almost 500 pages. It's just under 500 pages very, very quickly, because she's constantly keeping the plot going, but it's just paced well. It doesn't feel too rushed in certain places or too slow in others. Like I said in The Wolf Den, these characters are nuanced. They become even more nuanced in The House with the Golden Door, again, which I would expect, because you're spending even more time with them. In a lot of ways, The Wolf Den is setting up a lot of the things that are going to happen here in the circumstances that these characters are in. And Harper continues to make the villains dynamic and in some cases morally gray. Harper also knows how to fade to black when necessary, like I talked about with The Wolf Den, and she really excels out at it even more here. She gives these characters, especially these women, privacy. These are women who are courtesans and prostitutes, yet there are no explicit sex scenes in this novel. Or really in The Wolf Den. You get a little bit more of it in The Wolf Den, but you may be getting it from somebody else's perspective, being aware of what's happening to another woman. But in House with the Golden Door, she just fades to black. And I think it's her way of showing respect to these women, because they're often put in circumstances that they really did not choose to be in. Also, we live in a culture today where stuff is pretty explicit. There are things that are shown on TV now that even 20 years ago wouldn't have been shown on regular TV. I was watching The Matrix a couple months ago, and that movie was rated R, but it was released in the 90s, early 2000s. When was The Matrix released? The first Matrix. Anyway, it's very turn of the decade. It's very Y2K, right? I think it's late 90s, maybe 2000. That movie is rated R. When I rewatched it, I was like, this would now be considered PG-13. There are just things that society has become a little bit more laissez-faire about, and sometimes I think we become too dulled to things like violence and sex scenes. Especially when the two are combined. There is something to be said about, everybody says it, oh, show me, don't tell me. I do think that there are times when it's appropriate, depending on what the novel is getting at. But is it wholly necessary? One could argue no. Long story short, Harper is showing you, not telling you. And it really suits the novel and what she's getting at when it comes to showing respect for these women who really suffered through life and in a lot of ways got the short end of the stick. In this novel, Amara, because she's a freed woman, she is moving in more refined social spaces. And as a freed woman, she now has to adjust her behavior to follow suit. And I talked about that when it comes to the use of profanity in the Wolf Den. There is less profanity in this book than the Wolf Den because of the social circles that Amara is now having to navigate. When Harper is using profanity in this book or not using it, it's code switching. She is showing how women like Amara had to linguistically interact and change their language based on their social environments. Amara has mastered being able to switch back and forth seamlessly, and it shows her skill as a social chameleon. And so, because I'm pretty much a stan of Elodie Harper, I do follow her on Instagram. She followed me back and I was really chuffed about it. And so she commented on my review of the house and she was like, I'm so glad that, I'm paraphrasing. She's like, I'm so glad that you picked up on the code switching. I was like, yes. So she was like, was picking up what I was putting down. I was like, my girl, yes. So the use of language here, pay attention to it in the Wolf Den and compare it to how it's used in the House with the Golden Door. Elodie Harper nailed it. Lastly, in this book, I want to shout out my favorite character of this series, and it is Britannica. She enters into the first book. She comes to the Wolf Den. She's a Briton. And so she's got red hair and she is like super fit because she comes from a tribe in which even women were warriors. So she knows how to fight. She is a wild tang, okay? Britannica is the MVP to me in this novel. She gets way more, she gets more time in this novel because she enters in a later time in the Wolf Den, but she gets more page space, if you will, and she is just so dryly funny. She often says what needs to be said out loud that as a reader I was thinking, and I'm like, this woman, okay, she is not traditionally feminine. She, like I said, she's a warrior in the tradition of her people, and she's got a good head on her shoulders. She is street smart, okay? She sees people for who they are. She can read the room. She knows who's shady. Like, she is who you want your right hand to be. And so the friendship between Amara and Britannica really develops more in the House with the Golden Door. And I'm really excited to see what Harper does in the last installment of this trilogy with Britannica. And Harper did post on Instagram that after she's done with the Wolf Den trilogy, she'll be going into another trilogy and she'll be exploring these warrior women of Britain. So I'm excited during ancient times, and I'm really excited about that. But here is a quote that made me laugh out loud. And it just shows Britannica in all her glory. Amara says, "You always hated her." Britannica goes, "That's nothing. I hate most people." I feel that in my soul. You know, she can cut to the chase. She knows who's shady. She can read the room, and she's just like, she's going to call a spade, and I love her for it. Let's put this down. I'm done. The House with the Golden Door is everything that I love about historical fiction. Engaging plot, the characters are fascinating. Drama plus more drama. There are times when I just couldn't put the book down because I was nervous. I was like, I gotta find out what happens next. I'm getting a little scared. And it was just really captivating and held me on. And I just had to kind of held on until the end to see what would happen. And again, it's an interesting time period. I am always going to pick up a historical fiction novel that is set in the ancient times and the height of the Roman Empire. Also, side note, Mount Vesuvius has not erupted yet. So I'm going to assume this is just a guess, that Mount Vesuvius is going to erupt in the last installment. We shall see. I don't know. But I don't think that she's going to really, really focus on it. I don't think that she wants that to be the driving plot of her novels. But Pompeii, the destruction of Pompeii is kind of luring in the back of my mind. But yes. And so also, Harper's writing is still matter of fact and evocative, but even as I can see a slight refinement even still in the writing between the Wolf Den and the House of the Golden Door. So you can tell that the House of the Golden Door is the succession to the Wolf Den because her writing is getting even better, as it should. You know, the more you write, the more you practice, the more you have people editing, you're going to get better. So I'm really excited to see what her other novels are going to be reading like. I spent a decent amount of time studying ancient Greece and ancient Rome in undergrad, and I can tell that Harper has done her homework, and I can always appreciate that. This is the type of book that is smart and well researched, but it's compulsively readable. To me, it is the perfect book to pick up when you want something that's just addictive to read, but not what's the word I'm trying to use? I had it and it evaded me. When you want something that's addictive but intelligent. Maybe that sounds harsh, but her book is her books are intelligent and addictive. Kills two birds with one stone. And I think it's the perfect summer read when summer, as of this video, is pretty much, it's wrapping up. Thank God. But, or maybe during the holidays, you know, the Christmas is coming up and people have time off work and you just want to, especially that week after Christmas, when you have that week between Christmas and New Year's, when people really, I think, take that week in particular to just lounge around the house in their sweatpants and read and get cozy. It's a perfect time to read books like this, because you just don't want to put them down. And once you pick it up, you're not going to be able to put it down. I gave this book a 4.25 out of 5 because it was, again, I just could see the refinement from the Wolf Den. But again, I am still very picky with my 5-star reads. I mean, it is what it is. I hope that this 2-in-1 book review was helpful to you. It was a request, as I said. And have you read The Wolf Den and The House with the Golden Door? Are you intrigued? Do you want to read it? Yeah. So leave me a comment down below. Let me know how you feel about these books, or if they're now on your radar. Feel free to give me a like, a subscribe, and feel free to follow me on Instagram. That is where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. And also, so my links are down below. So yeah, I'm going to wrap this up and I will see you in the next one.